Dear friends, brothers and sisters, much peace to everyone. And we would like to welcome everyone to joining us in this very important topic that will be presented by Andreia, reincarnation. This topic, it's extremely important because it explains a lot of inequalities, all the problems, many circumstances that we are living nowadays. And the Spiritist Federation of Florida hopes with these lives that we have been promoting in English, in Spanish, and Portuguese to disseminate Spiritism in this beautiful country. Today, we find ourselves with a great advantage since technology give us this hand helping us not only to produce nice and quality materials regarding the explanation that the Spiritist teachings bring to us, but help you all to assist, to watch from the comfort of your home nice lectures with very important information. Before we bring Andreia Marshall Netto, into the stream, we wish to welcome you to the following me with an opening prayer. Let's all join in this moment, asking the presence of the good spirits so they can help us out and inspire each and every one of us, and especially inspiring our Andreia, our dear speaker of the night, so she can follow the pathway of clarification of many topics, many aspects, when Allan Kardec brought to all of us so many questions that were answered to the good spirits in bringing light to this world that so much need clarification and illumination. May Jesus help us all, bringing peace to each home and helping us once more to become someone bringing peace to this world. Thank you very much, dear Jesus, and so be it. Well, we have our speaker today. She is one of the directors of the Spiritist Federation of Florida, and Andrea Marshall Netto, and her reflections will be based on the Spirit's book, The Gospel According to Spiritism, and also the books Wake Up and Be Happy, and also Glorious Day, dictated by the Spirit author Joana de Angelis, channeled by the medium Divaldo Pereira Franco. We welcome you, Andreia. I hope, we all hope, that this evening could be a blessing moment so we can understand a little more about this beautiful body of knowledge that we call Spiritism. Be very welcome. The word is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. As Marcelo mentioned, this is a very important topic, especially when we consider the many difficulties and trials and challenges that we face, that other people face, and we often wonder, where is justice with everything that we see happening in our world today? So this is why we wanted to bring the topic on reincarnation. And as Marcelo mentioned, we did use 4 books for our reflections today, which I really truly hope you will feel encouraged to read, which is The Spirit's Book and Gospel According to Spiritism by Allan Kardec. If you have not yet studied these books, they are very important to understand a lot of what we are going to be saying. And also Wake Up and Be Happy, as well as Glorious Days by the Spirit author Joana de Angelis, dictated to her, to the medium Divaldo Pereira Franco, as all that we are bringing today is a result of what we studied. always very careful to bring, as Marcelo mentioned, spiritism, that we are disseminating spiritism because a lot of people are unaware of the type of content that we so blessedly have in our hands, which makes it a lot easier, not easier, but it makes it a bit easier, easy going to be able to face a lot of what we endure, a lot of what we face, that we are able to look back and realize that everything that has happened so far in our existence is not the beginning. It is a continuation in our own spiritual progress as we continue evolving, as we continue growing, as we continue ascending as far as our spiritual progress is concerned. That this life right here is but an experience that we are having in this physical body, in this flesh that we were so blessed and given to be able to fulfill our trials, our commitments, our missions, whatever we want to call it. That's what reincarnation is going to be addressing today. So we just wanted to begin with the very first slide that we have here, in which Allan Kardec was really he was so inspired when asking the benevolent spirit on question 171 of the spirit's book, on what is the doctrine of reincarnation based. Look at this question. It is so interesting that Allan Kardec would think to ask these questions to the benevolent spirits, and they answered, on the justice of God and revelation. We will repeat this to you repeatedly. A good father always leaves the door of repentance open to his children. Doesn't reason tell you that it would be unjust to keep eternal bliss from those who have not enjoyed the opportunities needed to improve themselves? Aren't all people God's children? Is it only among selfish human beings that we find iniquity, insatiable hatred, and unforgiving punishment? So here we see this justice that they're bringing us here, and we start reflecting about God a little bit, because Allan Kardec is going to further comment on this question, and he's basically going to tell us that we are all en route towards perfection, all of us. So when he says that, he has pretty much placed us all on the same boat, so to speak, right? So planet Earth is that boat, and we are all here reincarnated en route to perfection. And God, our Father, our Creator, an educator, He is going to furnish us with the means of accomplishing just that through the different trials and corporeal life that we are given. This is not the first one. It is certainly not going to be the last one. But out of divine justice, God allows us to accomplish in a new existence what we could not accomplish in a previous one. And we start to think about this, right? When we open the book Heaven and Hell, also another book by Allan Kardec that we highly recommend the reading, we do see Allan Kardec bringing us a lot of reflection about this. How is it that we could conceive someone inheriting heaven, having had just one existence? How could a mother be happy in a very celestial place, understanding that the love of her life may be a child, maybe a spouse who actually sinned, right? Sinned, we're going to use the word sinned here, ends up in hell. How is she going to be in bliss if the love of her life, those that are most dear to her heart, are suffering at a very low place in their spiritual existence? So this is the divine aspect of it, the divine justice of it, in which God allows all of his children to accomplish that which they have not been able to accomplish yet. And when we open the Spirit's book and when we open the gospel according to Spiritism, we start learning about the different hierarchy of spirits, spirits in different categories, spiritually speaking, of their progress, that shows us that there is an infinite road ahead of us for perfection, that we are not to look back in this present existence and be like, my God, I've committed so many mistakes, I have wasted so many time, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to get there. No, it's not that at all. Everything that has happened to us in this existence serve as experiences according to Joanna de Angelis, that spirit author who is a psychotherapist in her own maternal heart, in telling us that we shouldn't waste our time considering the spilled milk, that we should actually look at those situations in our life as experiences and learn from them. So when we look ahead, we see that road ahead that is showing us this is the way to keep going. Looking back is not going to solve anything, it's not going to make anything better, but learning from it, not repeating the mistakes, and actually trying to extract the best from the situation, that is going to help us for sure. So, on the book, Glorious Days, we are going to be looking at a chapter called The Brief Essay on Reincarnation. And I just wanted to let everyone know here, Yvonne and John, Monique, Teresa, Inês, Kuya, and also our friend Will, that I see you. So if you have any questions or if you want to make any comments, please go ahead and do so. I'll try to fit them in with what we're saying so we can interact a little bit, which is why we are holding these live presentations as promoted by the Spiritist Federation of Florida. So Joanna de Angelis brings us a brief history on reincarnation. And she's going to do an evaluation of how reincarnation has been proposed in different times of our human populated planet Earth, our boat, that same boat that we are in. And I'm not going to bring all of the instances that she brings us, but she's going to remind us that in Rome back then, reincarnation was highly respected by many philosophers, such as Posidonius and Virgil. She's going to say that Virgil affirmed that the souls, after having wandered around the abyss, they drink water from the Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, before returning to the physical body. Now, this is really interesting because in Spiritism, we learn about forgetfulness of the past. We talk about how when we reincarnate, we don't have any memory about what happened in a previous existence, and that there is a reason for that. It's not just because God wants to play a trick on us. No, there is a very profound and important reason for that. She goes on to say, and we're going to get to that in a little bit, but she goes on to say that Sallust taught everyone that our current congenital afflictions are the natural consequences of past experiences. And though he did not use the word perispirit, in Spiritism, we are taught about this aspect of congenital afflictions based on natural consequences of past experiences, which are stored, so to speak, in that little element that unites the spirit to the physical body, which is called perispirit. This is a whole other live in itself, and I'm sure that our friends at the Spiritist Federation will eventually do perhaps even a study group to go a little bit further into detail on these matters, or hopefully your own Spiritist centers are holding classes like this to answer these questions. Later on, she's going to say, Philo, a Jew from Alexandria, confirmed reincarnation, explaining that God created all souls pure, but after making their choice between good and evil, free will, the reincarnation cycle began. And of course, we learn in Spiritism that God created all spirits simple, not pure, simple and unaware, or ignorant is the word used, as in ignoring the laws, the divine laws, because they're unknowing. And of course, reincarnation allows us, that cycle allows us to discern between good and evil, right and wrong, and we start making choices based on the type of consequences from our actions, right? As we do with a child. When a child does something wrong and the parent educates that child, of course, we see them saying you should have not done that. And usually they'll be grounded, or maybe their toys will be taken away. Well, spiritually speaking, we are in the teenage phase of our existence, if I can say it that way, walking towards adulthood. So we're still learning. And reincarnation is that time that allows us to review all that we actually accomplished so far when we are in the spirit plane. And as Joana de Angeli is going to state later on, we begged for the opportunity to be in this existence with those whom we love, and even those that actually pose themselves to be an obstacle in a previous existence. And we can really understand what I'm talking about here when it's so easy to love someone, even in our families, and so hard to connect with another, right? So we're talking about a previous existence where we actually were with each other, but maybe the ties of the fraternal, the loving ties weren't developed yet, they weren't tightened yet. And so things did occur, and thank God for forgetfulness of the past. We are not able to remember because otherwise it would be impossible to be able to coexist with each other. And I'm not talking about coexist as in religion, I'm talking about coexisting in family life, which is a very important cell of society that we have, which is the home life, and how we interact with each other, and how we are able to offer the people that are in our lives a chance to make amends or even to forgive us for our own mishaps in the past as well. So, with the advent of Christianity, Joana de Angelis continues stating that reincarnation found a very solid foundations in the teachings of Christ. And those who are very studious, they will remember that conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus, in which he asks Jesus what was it that was needed in order to inherit the kingdom of heaven. And he said that verily I say to you that a man must be born again. And Nicodemus did not understand what he meant by that. And so we see that dialogue, and it's really fun to go back and observe these dialogues in light of Spiritism, because it makes it a lot easier to understand a lot of what we see in the New Testaments, in the Gospels, and align it with the Spiritist teachings so that we can actually make use of those situations between the disciples and the apostles in Christ and bring it into our lives in a proactive way, meaning it's not just theology, it's not just lost in time, but something that we can make the use of it in the here and now. And then, of course, we see Jesus also referring to settling debts and the consequences with the case of the man who was blind from birth. So they are asking, who is it that sinned, his mother or the father? Right? So we see Jesus addressing that situation because the blind man was blind from birth. So something must have happened. Why is it that he was blind from birth? Who was to blame? Right? And so Christ, of course, shows us also with his infinite love and compassion that there was no such thing as blame, but there was also the only thing that was there was the opportunity for growth, for spiritual progress, because Jesus's promise are based on divine justice. And we can say this because we find all that happened back 2,000 years ago, seeing reincarnation taking place. Some people were healed, others were not, which begs us to ask why. Why is it that that woman who was actually unable to walk, and her servant told her to go see Christ, and she goes thinking that Christ was going to rehabilitate her. And when she returns, the servant noticed that she's still unable to walk, and she says, well, how is it that he didn't heal you? And she says, he rehabilitated me in my soul. So she understood that past mistakes were actually what brought on the situation in the present life, which is the reason Christ did not heal everyone. There is a reason for that. But for us to believe that, we have to go back to that question in the Spirit's book, in which Allan Kardec posed the question, who or what is the most pure figure that we have ever been given by God to be among us on our planet, to show us the walk and talk the talk, and not just that, but walk the talk? And the answer was Jesus. It's the shortest answer, provided by the benevolent spirits, because he came to demonstrate to us how to be, how to actually look at one of the most important aspects of reincarnation, the tool that is going to allow us to really soar high and give a longer step in the little ladder of progress, which is forgiveness. Charity, as understood by Christ, wasn't about alms giving. It had to do with benevolence for everyone, indulgence towards others' mistakes, and forgiveness for the offenses. And it's interesting because that aspect of charity is one of the things that we hope for ourselves, that people will be benevolent towards us, that people will be indulgent towards our mistakes because we're going to make them, and they're going to be able to forgive us as well. Because those are one of the aspects of actually living healthily, which is forgiveness for oneself and for others as well. I watched a movie that was kind of scary at night. So I watched the rest of it today, and it was unbelievable because the story had to do with this guy, and he kept seeing ghosts in the shadows in this house that they rented as a VRBO. And he had his wife there and his child. He was a lot older than his wife. She was an actress, and they had this little girl. She was so cute, and she was really smart for her age. And she caught on that her father wasn't really liked by the masses. And so she asked her mother why. And her mother explained to her in a way that a child could understand, that, and so that we could understand as well, that he had been married previously, and that the wife, the first wife, had died in the bathtub. She had drank too much, she was taking medication, and she died. And he was accused of her death, but he was actually found not guilty. But a lot of people still questioned his innocence. And so the end of the movie is mind blowing, because when, I'm not sure, Monique is going to say, don't tell me the end, but I'm going to say it because I want to make the point here. The point was that when he started seeing some really crazy stuff happening in the house, his wife and him had a fight, so she left the house and the child stayed behind with him. And things started happening between that afternoon and evening that he decided to leave, and he couldn't. He walked and walked and walked towards the city, the little town. It was 4 miles long, but then he starts seeing light, and when he gets to it, he realizes that he's back at the house. And what happened was that his guilt was so profound that he couldn't leave. Guilt because he was actually responsible for the wife's death. So that guilt followed him everywhere. And reincarnation is that one door. Joana de Angelis is going to say it's the customs that we go through, and we leave that which is not necessary for that present reincarnation, and we come equipped with tools that makes it easier for us to deal with past mistakes. Even though we don't remember what they were, we all bring within us that that sentiment that something needs to be addressed. For example, I am fully aware of what my qualities are. I'm fully aware what my moral vices are. I can really make a reflection if I do that which the benevolent spirit St. Augustine told Allan Kardec, which is to revisit ourselves at night and start making an account of how we felt, our actions, what we did, and try to do better the next day. So if I'm someone who's very proud, I am able to realize that pride and how it resurfaces and what makes my face go red and what makes me explode. If I am someone vain, I'm going to realize what is it that brings that vanity on. I'm able to see it. There is no need for anyone else to point the finger at us and show us exactly what needs to be worked on. We know that. We know it. And so the aspect of reincarnation that allows us to reincarnate with each other in our family home is to help each other progress and evolve, because we all have really great things and we all have things that needs to be worked on. Teresa, I think the name of the movie is You Should Have Left or something like that. I'll make sure that I'll comment back here when I get the chance. So I think that's the move. That's what it's called. Like, you should have left when they had the chance or something like that. I'll take a look. So continuing on, she's going to tell us that the favorable testimonies regarding reincarnation was founded by Ammonius Saccas in 193 before Christ, which produced a significant number of thinkers, church fathers, theologians who demonstrated its factuality. And one of the things that she mentions, one of the aspects came from Origen, for example, because he affirmed that souls could live without bodies, for bodies are of secondary importance considering that spiritual life is the real life. And we learn about this in Spiritism because we actually find that spirits that are in its errant state, ERRANT, errant as in waiting between one life and the next. So if I discarnated today, if I die today, I'm going to be in the spirit realm, and I am an errant spirit because I haven't yet reached that level of purity. And so purity per se, because we all understand what that means, of perfection, relative perfection, if we want to say this. And so I still need to reincarnate. And when I'm in the spirit world without my physical body, I am going to wait for another opportunity at reincarnating. And this is basically what Origen was trying to say. And ever since the council at Constantinople, we see reincarnation becoming a heretic doctrine, thanks to the petulance of the Emperor Justinian. The assembly he gathered opened the door to persecution that would later take place through the Inquisition and every mechanisms of medieval intolerance that we see, which extended into the modern age. It's a lot of history, right? But what we want to say is that the aspect of reincarnation are scattered in different periods. And though reincarnation was always criticized by some of the fathers of the church, as well as other philosophers and skeptics, it has remained alive throughout the centuries, reappearing in the most diverse cultures and in the most diverse times. There are hundreds of writers, poets, thinkers, scientists that have really avowed their beliefs in reincarnation due to the justice of the evolutionary process. And among these writers, poets, thinkers, we're going to find Edgar Allan Poe, we're going to find Walt Whitman, we're going to find James Joyce, Walter Scott, Gustav Mahler, Tolstoy, even Victor Hugo, Robert Browning, and Oscar Wilde, just to name a few. But what we're going to say is, without reincarnation, how is it that we would be able to understand the differences in destinies, in behaviors, in tendencies, inclinations, if all of the souls were created at the same time and were destined to choose their future by behaving in such a way that is not in line with their own possibilities? This is a very important question when we consider reincarnation. What resources are there available to someone who is suffering from insanity, schizophrenia, severe congenital malformations, or even whose capacity of discernment is impaired because of their limitations, physical limitations or dysfunction, right? I mean, they're not going to have the same opportunity to get to that progress in just one existence. That terrible manifestation in people's destinies with their shocking differences cannot originate in divine will, because we're going to see that divine will is not going to put people to test their fragility on choosing what they should or should not do in just one existence. And this is why Joana de Angeli is going to tell us that God aspires for humanity, for his children to reach perfection to which it has been destined, because we are destined to perfection, but it must be the consequences of our own personal efforts, those who strive and struggle, yes, to comfort, dignity to their own spirits. And this is the beauty of it, because a lot of people will say, well, why reincarnate, right? Well, because when we look at an athlete, right, and he or she are training for a massive marathon, and they're watching their weight, they're watching what they're eating, they're training hard, they're observing how they sleep, they get help from coaches, they get help from their family, and when they get to that finish line, whether they came in first or last and they were able to finish, they're going to look back and say, wow, that was my own effort that got me to where I am. Even if the medal is not a gold medal, it doesn't matter. For the spirit, the immortal spirit, being able to get to the very end of one's existence really is really important for the spirit. Whether we had one step that we were able to climb in the ladder of infinite road to perfection, or if we were actually able to climb several, which is what Missionaries in the Light, and I know that I have a lot of people watching from our study group, Missionary of the Light, in which we find the term completist, people who were able to complete their existence, their mission in that one existence, right? Which is not to say that they're going to be pure spirits at that moment and perfect. It just means that what they were set out to do in that one existence, they were able to accomplish. And a lot of us, we get really close to it, and that's good. That's not a bad thing. And that's the beauty of Spiritism as well. It's empowering to the point where it shows us, here it is, the tools you've been given. You know what you can do, you know what you cannot do, because we know our limitations. We learn from nature because we were created simple, but we were endowed, we are endowed with a vast potential. And that's the beauty of it. They are dormant. They might be in the form of seedlings. They might already be growing. It doesn't matter. We advance through personal effort and we gradually grow to reach what Joana de Angelis calls, and this is her term, stellar glory, thanks to reincarnation. When we observe behavior conflicts in our society, questionable moral anguishes, and disturbing complexes, when we see existential and emotional torments and anxiety, when we see degenerative and irreversible illnesses, intense hatred and love, depression that goes from one existence to the next, which happens a lot of times, backwardness and wisdom, gentleness and brutality, when we see noble attitudes and the complete opposite, saintly gestures and barbarity coexisting side by side in our world, how can we conceive that these individuals had but one opportunity, right? So this is what we're going to say. We're going to go here to slide number 3, in which we find Joana de Angelis telling us that reincarnation is the key to explain not just such instances, but all instances, differentiating individuals, even as we search for the genetic explanation for most physical, mental, and behavioral phenomena, given that the very genetic explanation is the consequence of a choice made by the spirit to mold through its perispirit the physical envelope it needs to settle debts, to make amends and grow. Let's translate what we just read here in Missionary of the Light. Yes, it is a beautiful book, and we can see a very clear and beautiful explanation of the planning of reincarnation. Thank you for that, Teresa. And Simonique also saying to seek the truth and understand the divine is to be subject to persecution in world history. Yep. So what did Joana de Angelis just talk about here? She's talking about how we are actually able to impress, if we want to say this, to cause an impression on our perispirit. Here's that word again. The perispirit is that semi-material body that is able, or link that is able to connect our spirit to the physical one. It is the mold that is going to serve as that tool for our physical body today. So when we see, for example, and this is not a general rule, let's make sure that I explain that. It's not a general rule, but when I see some congenital issues with babies and deformities perhaps in their head or their arms or their legs, we can explain this in stating that something happened in a previous existence where that mold, that semi-material body called the perispirit, actually received an impression that was negative. So let's say someone who committed suicide. Maybe they jumped from a building and landed on their head, or maybe they shot themselves in the head. It created a disharmony in this area right here. And this is the mold. Let's think about a cake. Those who bake, there are those beautiful cake pans that mold it into different shapes. That's what our perispirit is able to do. Everything that we do gets archived into our perispirit. Anything that we do to our physical body is going to cause an impression into our perispirit, because it is an exact copy of our physical body, only it is semi-material, whereas our physical body is material. So when we see these things happening in society, this is where we say, wow, there is justice where reincarnation is concerned. Because when we look at a situation like this, we realize that the spirit is not going to have that existence and that's it for he or she. No, it's but a step towards the next phase. And a lot of times the spirit gets ready, prepared for those very painful existences, as Teresa talked about here on Missionaries of the Light. We see Andre Lewis, the spirit author, through the mediumship of Francisco Candido Xavier, explaining exactly that, the mechanics behind reincarnation, and a lot of the disfigured, a lot of the situations that we find in our society today that explains a lot of the anomalies that we see, explaining God's justice in that way. So beings, what Joana de Angelo is talking about here is that we are responsible for our own destiny. We elaborate the physical body that is indispensable for our process of illumination, wherever that may lead us. So if I am someone who is fully aware that whatever I may be doing is causing harm to my physical body, and I continue doing so, of course, I'm going to not suffer, but answer for the consequences of those actions. And sure, sometimes it does cause a lot of suffering, but the spirit, a lot of times, will realize this in the spirit plane and ask for those type of existences to make amend and grow. The physical envelope that Joana de Angelis talks about in the slide right here is our physical body. The perispirit is that one semi-material body that is going to serve as the mold for our physical envelope in future existences. Whatever we do today is going to have a consequence tomorrow, and so on. Law of cause and effect, action and reaction. And that way it starts making a lot of sense, even for us that may be going through whatever it is that we are going through. We can go back 2,000 years ago. If your eye is a reason for a scandal, cut it off, take it off. If your hand is a reason for a scandal, your arm, cut it off. Of course, Christ didn't mean that in the very straight way. He was talking about if in a previous existence, whatever led us to, I'm not going to use the word sin, but to miss the mark, which is what sinning is, whatever that is, take it off. So here's the example. There was this guy who had no limbs whatsoever, upper body and lower body. And he was also blind. And he wasn't able to do things for himself unless he was able to count on someone. And so it was learned that in the previous existence, many previous existences, he committed suicide. Even when he had no limbs, upper limbs, he was able to utilize his legs and jump. Or even when he didn't have his legs, but he had use of his arms and his hands, he was able to cause harm to himself and die by the means of suicide as well. So he asked for one existence that he could actually resist the temptation to commit suicide. And that was what was given to him. So if your eyes is reason for scandal, cut it off. This is how we see Jesus making a very significant mention of the aspect of past lives and reincarnation as well. Of course, when we talk about this, a lot of people will say, well, what about, you know, having dreams about past lives? What about people who are able to do regression of memory? How does that work, right? And of course, we see that there is ample documentation in this. Childhood spontaneous memories that happens often between the ages of 2 and 7, before the spirit is really, really connected to their physical body. They may have dreams about past lives, or they might live it as it happened to the little boy James. This is a really cool documentary that you can find on a pilot named James, how he was able to remember how he died in, I think it was the Second World War. And not only that, he remembered his name, he remembered his best friend's name, his sibling's name. He knew about parts of the plane, and something that children just wouldn't know, the very mechanical parts of an airplane. And Carol Bowman became involved because this was causing the child a lot of distress, because the nightmares were very real. And so his parents reached out to this doctor, and she was able to work with him to try to address a very painful, destructive episode in which his spirit suffered in a previous existence, so that he could go on that present one, on the present one today. Of course, we know about revelations that are made through mediumistic communication, often to help us sort out different difficult relationships. Maybe it has expressed to us that that child that we have a hard time with was someone that we abandoned in the past, and maybe the reason why they're so rebellious today is to test how far our love will go. If we are going to be that parent again, that we're just going to say, you know what, I give up on you and you can go your way. Or it might be a situation in which we are contemplating maybe suicide, and we are having these deja vus in which we actually have this vague memory of something that has already happened, and it is actually calling us, it is actually trying to tempt us to take our lives yet again, and we are given these mediumistic communications to try to help us out. Whatever the case may be, when it is offered to us, it is because our spirit is ready to remember. Let me make this a little bit clear. When we were a child, when you were a child, if you endured a very painful situation, you might block it out. You block it out because it's a defense mechanism. You're not ready to deal with that. So psychiatrists, psychologists will say at the right time, the memory is going to resurface when, as an adult, he or she is ready to deal with that pain. Well, forgetfulness of the past works just like that. There is a reason for that. I forget who was the philosopher who said that if we had access to all of the memories pertaining to our previous existences, our brain wouldn't be able to tolerate it. The emotional discharge would be too great, and we wouldn't be able to deal with our present life at this moment. So this is why we talk about regression of memory, because it's one of the scientific proofs of reincarnation, especially when we see people that are born with a birthmark. This happens a lot for children in India, where they might have, like a birthmark underneath their rib cage, and they will remember that in a previous existence, maybe they died with a bullet or somebody with a knife that cut through them. And as I said before, the perispirit, that semi-material link that unites the physical with the spirit, is going to suffer that impact of that reflect of what is happening to their physical body, and they're born with it because the mode to our future physical body is going to show that birth mark or defect, whatever it might be. So forgetfulness of the past comes in very handy when we reincarnate, when we start considering all of this, because it can't be overlooked, right? Except when we are being released from certain afflictions, where it is keeping us to reach a higher goal. We see people reaching out to therapists to try to access their past. And I'm going to make a comment right now that is something that we've learned from Dr. Alberto Almeida and other psychotherapists, transpersonal psychotherapists, who will say, do not travel the road towards regression of memory unless you have been really prepared by a professional, not only during, but before, preparation before, to help strengthen the emotional discharge that the spirit might happen during it and even after. Because it's not going to be easy to see certain things, certain unconscious recollection resurfacing as tendencies, attitudes, habits, interests, and differences. And not just that, trying to see and find out who exactly is by us, right? Beside us. Unhappy situations that happen, such as tragedy, that may have caused some harm that either we suffered or we actually caused to someone else. And Joana de Angeli is going to say that our psychophysical stability would suffer, and it would be impossible for us to continue with our process of evolution. It might actually cause someone to go insane and even commit suicide, because they would not be suitable beings to be able to have access to their previous existences. So we need to be very careful. And an example of this happens in No Solar, when this lady wanted to access her previous existences, and they were allowing her to go back only 300 years. This is really like, wow, 300 years, that's a lot. Well, not if you consider that we've lived many, many, many lives, that 300 years is nothing. Let's consider maybe 2 physical existences, 3 at best, right? Depending on how old we were when we died. So they only allow the spirit to have access to their subconscious only so far, because at times we are not able to support that pain that comes in. A lot of times we don't even need regression of memory. Melancholy sets in. There is a chapter 5, Blessed are the Afflicted, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, Marcelo can verify this information for us. In the Gospel according to Spiritism, on the Spirit's instruction, in which they dedicate an entire item to melancholy, in which they say there is a vague sadness that sometimes weighs in upon our hearts and makes lives very bitter. Believe me and strongly resist the feelings that weakens your willpower. The yearning for a better life is innate in the spirit of all human beings, but don't look for them in this world, because this is a world of trials and expiations. So melancholy sometimes has to do with our subconscious memory of the spirit plane. It might be recollection that is in the subconscious of a past life that is better than the one that we are in, from a point of view of immediate suffering, not of the eternal spirit, right? We have to consider that as well. So a lot of times, if we go to try and look for past life regression, this would trigger a recollection of everyone who has been part of our lives, even people that might not be in this one right now, which would make it even worse. Can you imagine? I'm going to make a joke here. I'm sure Marcelo is going to appreciate. He's married to me and he's feeling melancholy, and he decides to do a regression of memory, and he finds out that the true love of his life is not me. She's not even in this physical existence. Can you imagine the pain this poor guy would feel, right? So it's something that happens. Sometimes we have these recollections that resurfaces here and there, but it's not really a full-on memory, but it triggers a pain, this feeling of heaviness in the heart that sometimes makes us wish that we were somewhere else. And the spirits tell us to resist those feelings. Pray, do whatever you need to do to allow yourself to get off of that. Because one of the things they tell us is that all of us have had good and bad experiences imprinted in the innermost recesses of our souls. They're there to allow us to actually grow. But because we don't like suffering, right? Nobody likes to suffer, right? We try to look for something to try to make sense of what we are going through in this existence, not knowing that whatever it is that we are seeking is actually worse than what we are actually going through right now. So we're going to go to slide 4, in which Joana de Angeli is going to say Lucid awareness is the road to spiritual ascension, mainly when the forces of love craft the wings of angelhood. So it's interesting that she talks about the need to be aware, lucidity, this quality that is really important. But it is for this reason that during the intervals between one reincarnation to the other one, depending on our evolutionary level, the spirit is going to experience other states in preparation for its physical rebirth. It's interesting because when we read Missionaries of the Light, we are going to understand these programs that are defined and that are there to actually delineate future experiences that are going to accompany the process of different culture, moral, spiritual developments that we need, characteristics of these other states, right? And it's going to be reflected, transferred to our physical realm to promote not only ourselves, but also the world and its inhabitants. And a lot of times it's going to come in the form of missions, very painful one. Let's think about people that have had very significant missions in our history, and we're going to find that their lives wasn't filled with joy. It wasn't. When we look at those martyrs, right? People want to call them martyrs, but I believe that those missionaries were very aware of the pain that they were going to go through in this physical existence, but how that one step was going to promote their spiritual development to the point where they couldn't even foresee. And this existence in itself can be a very long one or it can be a very short one according to the needs of every individual. And this is where the justice of reincarnation comes in, because we are never going to be dealt a hand that we can't play. Here for my poker players, I don't play poker, I don't even know how to, but it just came to my mind. Thank you, Teresa. Gospel explained by Spiritism. Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 5, Blessed are the afflicted, is where that item melancholy is that I mentioned a little bit earlier. Thank you. So, whatever hand we have been dealt, we were prepared for it. We actually had an opportunity to recover from our previous existence. We were able to breathe in the spirit plane, and we were ready for new experiences. So much so that sometimes we may ask the benevolent spirits for this or that life, and they're going to say, Andreia, you're not ready for that yet. Riches and beauty? Nope, not yet. You're not ready for all that comes, the trials that is going to come, the tests that are going to come for a life in riches. People think that being rich is great, but as we learned with Paula, she's in Heaven and Hell. She talks about how to be beautiful, to have riches, to be able to do all that she was doing, that one life that we so admire in the book Heaven and Hell. She's in the condition of the happy spirits. She talks about having been prepared for it in 3 different lives. I think that's it. That's Marcelo's favorite passage. He's going to correct me if I'm wrong, but we get ready for it. And this is something that we learn about Spiritism, is the notion of responsibility that we are going to find right here. Oh, look at all the help that I'm getting here. I just noticed on all the comments that we see on the Facebook, question 132, what is the purpose of reincarnation? Very good. And then the continuation of the comments. Thank you, Teresa and Marcelo, for that. So Joana de Angeli talks about the need to be wise. The knowledge about reincarnation implies responsibility instead of complacency, and dynamic behavior instead of stagnation, since the person knows that his or her evolutionary process will be the product of personal choice. Wow. And that's where Spiritism is so empowering, because I can no longer blame my husband, my wife, my kids. I cannot blame the governor. I cannot, sorry, no political game here. I can't blame society. All she's saying is that I am the person who is going to be responsible for my own evolutionary process. It's going to be the product of my personal choice, what I choose to do with my life. That's the empowering part of Spiritism, that tells us that we are able to make choice of values in the line with what is good, in the line with what is correct. And even when we actually commit a mistake and suffering sets in, it follows the urgent need for self transformation, a painful process that can be avoided. But when we don't avoid, even then, it's going to be a process for self transformation. And that's where the process of reincarnation comes in, explaining to us how important it is. And this is also one of the reasons that we talk about why Spiritism is shows us that abortion is a crime. And I will say, I will use the term as it is, because it's one of the things that we are taught in which Allan Kardec asked the benevolent spirits, when is it that the spirit actually joins the physical body? And they tell us the union begins at conception, but it only completes at the moment of birth. Because that spirit, that baby loading right there, it's very cute, right? That spirit is being given the opportunity to have a new existence, to plan, to put into plan that which was actually developed in the spirit plane, that which was reviewed based on previous existences. The spirit begs to reincarnate, and when that process is cut short, when the possibility of reincarnation is cut short, we can imagine the disappointment of the spirit to not be able to reincarnate. But let's remember something. If by any chance we're watching and we did have an abortion and we feel guilty about it, don't feel guilty. Whatever it is that we didn't know, even if we did, we go back to Jesus, always goes back to Jesus. And remember that he said that love covers a multitude of sins or mishaps or missing the mark. And we are able to create beautiful things when we are aware of past mistakes. We see this in example of the woman Mary of Magdalene, whose life was entirely devoted to selling her seduction, to having a life filled with the immediate pleasures of the flesh, not only hers, but other men as well, who sought her only for the perfumes of her youth. And then when she finally encounters Christ, she understood that the love that she was seeking was not in a life filled with debauchery, but rather it was right there in front of her. And when he tells her to be a mother, and she says, damned of me that I can't have kids, he says, Mary, love covers a multitude of sins. Be the mother in humanity. Embrace those that are motherless, orphans, even adults who don't even have a family member. There is so many people in the world that are walking alone, not feeling that they are part of something amazing, just as being a child of God is. So as I go back here to slide, as we're kind of, I know we have a longer time for these presentations, but I don't like to keep too long. We're going to find Joanna de Angelis telling us that the process of reincarnation is the only one consistent with the justice of God. It offers everyone, each and every one, the same opportunities of evolution, enriching spirits with the noble conquest of thought and emotion as they rid themselves of predominating atavism stemming from the primitive evolutionary experiences. Let's make this simpler. When we think of a beautiful monarch butterfly, as we see the one right there, almost ready to break free, we remember that before that butterfly got to that stages, it crawled on the mud, on what wasn't beautiful. It wasn't able to jump. It wasn't able to soar high. It was nature showing us that everything is a process, the process of reincarnation that is offering us the same moment, not moments, but opportunities for evolution. When that monarch butterfly gets to that point where she's able to break free from that cocoon, which could be symbolic our physical body in the process of its own evolution, and we are able to soar high, before that butterfly flies, she needs to work out her wings. She needs to stretch so that all of it gets, all her strength gets to the wing and she's able to fly high. It's painful. It's a painful process, and it's one that demands effort from the butterfly. So much so that if we were able to break that cocoon and help her to fly, she would die because she needs that moment that is hers. It's uniquely her moment of breaking free from that which is holding her behind, not allowing her to soar high. And that's the beauty of nature. It shows us that there are no jumps, there is no skipping from the process of being a rosebud to a beautiful perfumed flower. We need to go through the process. The seed needs to break through that mud, through that dirt, in search of light, of nutrients, of food, in able to grow, develop that bud, open it, and allow its perfume to beautify the pathway of those that walk on by. The same can be said about that. So, thanks to the law of cause and effect, thanks to the law of action and reaction, we find that every person is responsible for the results of his or her journey, with the liberty to act and the responsibility for the consequences of any choices. This is very powerful. This is very powerful. In that sense, Joana de Angeli is going to say, keep in mind that reincarnation is an evolutionary resource divinity provides us. Reincarnation is a gift from God for the spiritual evolutions of beings, which is why suicide is something that we talk about often, because when the spirit commits suicide, he or she, that woman, that man, is actually not allowing themselves to make the most of that divine resource that we are given. And the situation that they find themselves in is not as painful as the reality of the spirit, who gets to the spirit plane, realizing that the liberty that they acted upon, the responsibility for the consequences that their experiences was based on their choice. And we already know how painful it is, because the very first painful realization that the spirit faces upon arriving in the spirit plane is that they're still alive. That whatever it is that they're trying to kill is still there. But now it is no longer a tiny monster. It's huge. It's painful. And the spirit realizes way too late that the action was actually not the most favorable one. This is why Joana de Angeli is going to tell us, as much as it may surprise you, you begged for the occasional affliction, periodic diseases, frequent moral testimonies, so that your conscience would not forget the fragility of physical life or the peculiarity of characteristics of human evolution, which almost always happens through pain. Almost always happens through pain. Your spirit mentors warned you you would lack resilience for the harsh confrontations of the physical journey. But because you could foresee a future that was happy ahead, you said that you would bear your cross with a smile. You would respond to slander with forgiveness. You would face antagonism with faith. You would experience abandonment with courage. You were conveniently prepared for the undertaking. And the noble spirits, the loyalty of the noble spirits have been made present ever since you decided to reincarnate. Some with devoted parents, others not, but always with that benevolent spirit who advocated for us and who are present as our faithful comrades. We took the plunge into the physical fog amid joy and promises determined to succeed. We did. The business plan was to succeed, was to be resourceful and proactive. The investments made on our behalf were great. So she says, support yourself in courage and faith, your safety mechanisms. You're where you need to be in order to attain liberation. Heavy clouds that frequently come to you with thunderstorms, threatening, making your days, your life dark, are actually just temporary. Behind it, there are blue skies. So keep in mind, she says, the need to thank God for the opportunity to be the one who cries in this life, but resist situations in which others smiles for the immediate pleasures of life. Everyone is going to have their day, she says. Everyone is being invited one by one to reflect and to mature, to start being responsible with the life that has been given to each and every one of us. Death is not going to spare anyone. We will be awakening in the spirit plane with all that we were able to accomplish and that which we were not able to accomplish. And for sure, we are going to beg for yet another existence as well. So she says, finally, as we come to the end of our presentation, Jesus, who is perfect, experienced sarcasm, desolation, denial, and betrayal at the hands of humans, teaching us that true love is patient, tolerant, understanding, and never complains. He knew that the earth is still a school of redemption, and the humans that inhabit it undergo a process of learning and spiritual completion. So she will say, don't ever complain again. And then I'm going to finalize with the message that she said on the book, Wake Up and Be Happy. Remember, Jesus is the best way to overcome disappointment and revolt. Let his psychism vitalize you and increase your interest in this struggle, always strengthening you. Attuned to him, you will overcome perturbing problems and challenging difficulties. Never harbor any doubts concerning divine help. It's always, always here. Regain your serenity and uplift yourself through prayer. Do not complain and act calmly, for every achievement results from well-directed effort and work. To complain is a waste of time. Open yourself up to the good and be patient. And on this note, with much gratitude and hopefully love in our hearts, I'm going to bring back our host with the most, Marcelo. And I'm going to thank you for your time and your patience with me in this last 1 hour of our program today.
Thank you very much, Andrea. You brought us a lot of information, and I invite each and every one to dive into this book, the Spirit's book, that brings us all those questions that actually invite us to think, reflect, pay attention to life, even though we are having a very difficult moment in our lives. Life is worth it. And if it's difficult today, hold on, be patient, be courageous. I'm assure you, tomorrow will be another day. I'm gonna take advantage of your presence here, and I'm going to invite you, Andrea, to conduct our final prayer so we can close this session. We can close our live for today.
So let us thank God and the benevolent spirits for the moment that we have just had, for the books that we have at our disposal to study, for this beautiful, liberating body of knowledge that we have with Spiritism that comes at the appropriate, appointed time in which we have reached a maturity to be able to understand, to be able to accept at least a little of that which we can understand into our own lives and bring it into practice. We know we are very far from being the spirits that are pure, that are perfect. But we know that we are no longer those who applaud the suffering of our fellow beings, that we no longer find ourselves applauding the injustices, the prejudice that we find in our world. that someone else's pain is also our own because we are responsible for each other. Our planet is our home, and we are all siblings in the name of our Father above, our Creator, God. We know that as much as the disciples suffered and feared for their lives, in that day where thunderstorms almost took hold of their boats, and Christ was present, asking, "Where is your faith?" We see ourselves again in a very situation, as if our planet Earth is that boat ready to capsize. But our Master Jesus is looking at us, offering us his hand and saying, "Where is your faith?" Your faith is enough to save you if you should apply it, if you should engage it. Although it may be hard for some of us to have this innate feeling inside that is still developing, we are so very grateful that others who have already developed it full force have been placed beside us, showing us that we are able to trust, that we can give ourselves in, trusting life, trusting God, that this life was actually created with a business plan in mind of achieving spiritual success and greatness, that investments, spiritual ones, were made on our behalf. And though we can't see it or understand it yet, we count on you, dear Jesus and benevolent spirits, to stay with us, encouraging and guiding us, so that we never lose sight of what is important, which is our present life, which is the life of those who have been placed immediately beside us, and those who wait for us out in society, those that have suffered the loss, the unimaginable loss of losing their belongings, family members, those that are battling a very severe illnesses in their own homes. And here we are able to say a prayer. Let us extend our vibrations to our homes, to those whom we love, and even ourselves, remembering that you are with us as that shining sun whose rays extend far, far enough that we can't see, but whose light embraces us all. That lighthouse that shines in the dark, often we find ourselves in. Be the light in our lives always, dear Jesus, and bless our homes, our family, our friends, always. So be it.